Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. We're on our fifth reading of Boy by Roald Dahl. It's a beautiful day here in Edmonton, except the wind. I can hear it outside of the classroom. I'm here at Lillian Osborne School. We did the filming for our cinnamon bun video, so that will be on this page or another page in the next couple weeks. And Roald Dahl has just pretended to have appendicitis to get home. So let's keep reading. A drive in the motorcar. Somehow or other, I got through the first term at St. Peter's, and towards the end of December, my mother came over on the paddle boat to take me and my trunk home for the Christmas holidays. Oh, the bliss and the wonder of being with the family once again after all those weeks of fierce discipline. Unless you have been to boarding school when you were very young, it is absolutely impossible to appreciate the delights of living at home. It is almost worth going away because it's so lovely coming back. I could hardly believe that I didn't have to wash in cold water in the mornings or keep silent in the corridors or say sir to every grown-up man I met or use a chamber pot in the bedroom or get flicked with wet towels while naked in the changing room or eat porridge for breakfast that seemed full of little round lumpy gray sheep's droppings or walk all day along the perpetual fear of the long yellow cane that lay on top of the corner cupboard in the headmaster's study. The weather was exceptionally mild that Christmas holiday, and one amazing morning, our whole family got ready to go for our first drive in the first motor car we ever owned. This new motor car was an enormous, long, black French automobile called the De Dion-Bouton, which had a canvas roof that folded back. The driver was to be that 12 years older than me, half-sister, now age 21, who had recently had her appendix removed. She had received 2 full half-hour lessons in driving from the man who delivered the car. And in that enlightened year of 1925, this was considered quite sufficient. Nobody had to take a driving test. You were your own judge of competence. And as soon as you felt you were ready to go, off you jolly well went. As we all climbed into the car, our excitement was so intense we could hardly bear it. How fast will it go? We cried out. Will it do 50 miles an hour? It'll do 60, my ancient sister said. Her tone was so confident and cocky it should have scared us to death, but it didn't. Oh, let's make it do 60, we shouted. Will you promise to take us up to 60? We shall probably go faster than that, the sister announced, pulling on her driving gloves and tying a scarf over her head in the approval. There were 3 bodies in all, the driver behind the wheel, my half-brother, age 18, and one of my sisters, age 12. In the back seat, there were 4 more of us, my mother, age 40, 2 small sisters, age 8 and 5, and myself, age 9. Our machine possessed one very special feature, which I don't think you see of cars of today. This was a second windscreen in the back solely to keep the breeze off the faces of the backseat passengers. When the hood was down, it had a long center section and 2 little end sections that could be angled backward to deflect the wind. We were all quivering with fear and joy as the driver let out the clutch and the long, great black automobile leaned forward and stole into motion. Are you sure you know how to do it? We shouted. Do you know where the brakes are? Be quiet, snapped the ancient sister. I've got to concentrate. Down the drive we went and out into the village of Llandaff itself. Fortunately, there were very few vehicles on the roads in those days. Occasionally, you met a small truck or delivery van and now and again a private car. But the danger of colliding with anything else was fairly remote, so as long as you kept the car on the road. The splendid black tourer crept slowly through the village with the driver pressing the rubber bulb of the horn every time we passed a human being, whether it was the butcher boy on his bicycle or just a pedestrian strolling on the pavement. Soon we were entering a countryside of green fields and high hedges and not a soul in sight. You didn't think I could do it, did you? Cried the ancient sister, turning around and grinning at us all. Now you keep your eyes on the road, my mother said nervously. Go faster, we shouted. Go on, make her go faster. Put your foot down. We're only doing 15 miles an hour. Spurred on by our shouts and taunts, the ancient sister began to increase the speed. The engine roared and the body vibrated. The driver was clutching the steering wheel as though it were the hair of a drowning man. And we all watched the speedometer needle creeping up to 20, then 25, then 30. We were probably doing about 35 miles an hour when we came suddenly to a sharpish bend in the road. The ancient sister, never having been faced with a situation like this before, shouted, "Help!" and slammed on the brakes and swung the wheel wildly around. The rear wheels locked and went to fierce sideways skid, and then with a marvelous crunch of mudguards and metal, we went crashing into a hedge. The front passengers all shot through the front windscreen, and the back passengers all shot through the back windscreen. Glass, there was no triplex then, flew in all directions, and so did we. My brother and my one sister landed on the bonnet of the car. Someone else was catapulted out to the road, and at least one small sister landed in the middle of the hawthorn hedge. But miraculously, nobody was hurt very much except me. My nose had been cut almost clean off my face as I went through the rear windscreen, and now it was hanging only on by a single small thread of skin. My mother disentangled herself from the scrimmage and grabbed a handkerchief from her purse. She clapped the dangling nose back into place and fast and held it there. Not a cottage or person was in sight, let alone a telephone. Some kind of bird started twittering in a tree farther down the road. Otherwise, all was silent. My mother was bending over me in the rear seat and saying, "Lean back and keep your head up," to the ancient half-sister. Can you get this thing going again? The sister pressed the starter, and to everyone's surprise, the engine fired. "Back it out of the hedge," my mother said, "and hurry." The sister had trouble finding reverse gear. The cogs were grinding against one another with a fearful noise of tearing metal. "I've never actually driven backwards," she admitted at last. Everyone, with the exception of the driver, my mother and me, went out of the car and were standing on the road. Everyone was out of the car, pardon me. The noise of gear wheels grinding against each other was terrible. It sounded as though a lawnmower was being driven over hard rocks. The sister was using bad words and going crimson in the face. But then my brother leaned his head over the driver's door and said, "Don't you have to put your foot on the clutch?" The harassed driver depressed the clutch pedal and the gears meshed, and 1 second later, the great black beast leapt backwards out of the hedge and careered across the road, stood sideways across the road, blocking the highway. A man with a horse and cart now appeared on the scene, and the man dismounted from his cart and walked across to our car and leaned over the rear door. He had a big drooping mustache, and he wore a small black bowler hat. "You're in a fair old mess, sir, aren't you?" he said to my mother. "Can you drive a motor car?" My mother asked him. "Nope," he said, "and you're blocking up the old road. I've got 1,000 fresh laid eggs in this cart, and I want to get them to market before noon. Get out of my way," my mother told him. "Can't you see there's a child in here who's badly injured?" 1,000 fresh laid eggs, the man repeated, staring straight at my mother's hand and the blood-soaked handkerchief and the blood running down her wrist. "And if I don't get them to market by noon today, I won't be able to sell them till next week. Then they won't be fresh laid anymore, will they? I'll be stuck with 1,000 stale old eggs that nobody wants." "I hope they all go rotten," my mother said. "Now back that cart out of our way this instant." And to the children standing on the road, we cried out, "Jump back in the car, we're going to the doctor." "There's glass all over the seats," they shouted. "Never mind the glass," my mother said. "We've got to get this boy to the doctor fast." The passengers crawled back into the car. The man with the horse and cart backed off to a safe distance. The ancient sister managed to straighten the vehicle and get it pointed in the right direction. And then at last, the once magnificent automobile tottered down the highway and headed for Dr. Dunbar's surgery in Cathedral Road, Cardiff. "I've never driven in a city," the ancient trembling sister announced. "You're about to do so," my mother said. "Keep going." Proceeding at no more than 4 miles an hour the whole way, we finally made it to Dr. Dunbar's house. I was hustled out of the car and in through the front door with my mother still holding the blood-stained handkerchief firmly over my wobbling nose. "Good heavens," cried Dr. Dunbar. "It's been cut clean off." "It hurts," I moaned. "He can't go around without a nose for the rest of his life," the doctor said to my mother. "It looks as though he may have to," my mother said. "Nonsense," the doctor told her. "I shall sew it on again." "Can you do that?" my mother asked him. "I can try," he answered. "I shall tape it on tight for now and be up at your house with my assistant within the hour." Huge strips of sticking plaster were strapped across my face to hold the nose in position. Then I was led back into the car and we crawled the 2 miles home to Llandaff. About an hour later, I found myself lying upon that same nursery table my ancient sister had occupied some months before her appendix operation. Strong hands held me down while a mask stuffed with cotton wool was clamped over my face. I saw a hand above me holding a bottle with white liquid in it, and the liquid was being poured into the cotton wool inside the mask. Once again, I smelled the sickly stench of the chloroform and ether. The hand that was holding the bottle above my face kept tilting it farther and farther forward, and the white liquid dripped and dripped on the cotton wool. Blood red circles began to appear before my eyes, and the circles started to spin around and round until they made a scarlet whirlpool with a deep black hole inside the center. And miles away in the distance, a voice was saying, "That's a good boy. We're nearly there now. You're nearly there. Just close your eyes and go to sleep." I woke up in my own bed with my anxious mother sitting beside me, holding my hand. "I didn't think you were ever going to come round," she said. "You've been asleep for more than 8 hours." "Did Dr. Dunbar sew my nose on again?" I asked her. "Yes," she said. "Will it stay on?" "He says it will. How do you feel, my darling?" "Sick," I said. After I'd vomited into a small basin, I felt a little better. "Look under your pillow," my mother said, smiling. I turned and lifted a corner of my pillow, and underneath it, on the snow-white sheet, there lay a beautiful golden sovereign with the head of King George V on its uppermost side. "That's for being brave," my mother said. "You did very well. I'm proud of you." Next chapter. For tomorrow. It's a long one. So that is a very exciting chapter. There's a couple of questions I want you to answer. So they were going 35 miles an hour on their little motor car before they crashed. How many kilometers an hour is that? Mr. Lostrom, Mrs. Dice, can you help your students figure that out? And what do you think would happen now if you got into a car accident like that? Who would you have to call? Back in those days, there were hardly any cars on the road, never mind people, and the little horse and cart with the eggs wouldn't help them at all. So who's somebody that you could call to offer help today? And the other question is, what do we wear now in our cars to keep us safe? Okay, that's just your reading for today. I hope you have a really, really great day, and I will read the next chapter tomorrow when we learn all about the new headmaster, who is a very exciting person to learn about. I hope you have a good one. Bye.